So, give me 2 minutes and then we'll start.
You have to do it. No, then it's not about the LG. For bike, they don't need license. He needs license, but now he got the other. It's easier. It's very easy to get. I went halfway and I just went for the training, the test. The guy said, no. The guy told me, well, you have to have a picture with the license. And there was my date of birth was on the server. It's almost a year. I never went back. It's screwed. Dangerous. You can come early. Start late, come early. Yeah. You know, in Gulf Road, now the season will start. And maybe 2-3 days. 2-3 accidents. That's minimum. And that's what you know what they do? Really? Palm tree. Really calm tree. So one girl must be there or a source to make an accident. Yes. There's a source of all accidents. One time the dangerous was sitting there. Because just holding the bag and it's very
Okay, I think we'll make a start. Sorry for the lateness, but we agreed with the other tutorial that we would start at 9:30, so we'll just run this morning half an hour late. Gives us an hour for lunch, but that's probably enough time. Can you hear this okay? It's a bit echoey.
Yeah, I think you need to come this side.
I know.
But just move in the front.
I'm a left-handed, well, I'm right-handed, but I'm a left-handed speaker. I don't even know where the speakers are. No, they're all on the roof there. That's not good. No, I'm going to have to stand right at the back here. That works. Okay. Well, we'll just try and work best as we can with this. Let's see if I can. Which one is this my one? Okay, let's see how that works. That might be better. Okay, yeah, that's better. Now just turn the gain down a little bit. Okay, so this is, so I'm going to spend this morning talking about BGP multi-homing. So it's a tutorial's really in 2 sections. The first bit is looking at the whys, the wherefores, and some of the, I suppose, the industry best practices that have been accumulated over the years, or some of the industry better practices. I won't go as far as saying best practices, but some of the better practices over the years. And then a bit later on, I'm going to start looking at some fairly simple examples. a lot of the principle of this is if you can follow the simple examples, then doing the more complicated traffic engineering becomes relatively straightforward. Now, presentation slides are all here. I mean, are they on the MENOG 13 website? Well, I think they'll get there at some point today. But I also keep a repository of most of the tutorials and presentations I've been doing over the years. So you can go to that URL, and I mean, it's actually just a simple list. If you go into the FTP seminars list, it's literally just a collection of the tutorials and so forth I've done over the years. So look for the MENOG 13 ones, and that's what you'd want. So there's this tutorial here, as well as the other presentations from the conference and so forth. Please feel free to ask questions at any point. You know, don't be afraid about asking if there is anything. Given we're webcasting this as an experiment, what I'm doing is I'll repeat the questions if you have anything to ask, just so folks who are watching on the net can hear what the question was about as well. Right, so that's URL. Now, I've also got lots and lots of configuration examples in here. I'm using Cisco iOS CLI. Really, the only reason for that is because, well, I worked for Cisco for 13 years, and in my ISP days before Cisco, that was all that we used as well. So I'm kind of used to that. And the CLI is very similar to what most other vendors have. Folks using Juniper boxes seem to be able to pick the concepts up quite easily. I've tried doing this tutorial without any configuration examples, and it hasn't really worked awfully well. So that's why I've introduced some of the config examples going through the slide set. As I say here, it's also aimed at service providers. I mean, when I first put the slides together, there was a very, very distinct difference between how network operators did their BGP and traffic engineering and so on versus what you would call enterprises. The enterprise network, say in the late 90s, was still very much, oh, we've got one router, we've got two links to a couple of ISPs, and we just use some, you know, the ISP comes and configures BGP. And we usually do nothing more than put in a few static routes and kind of leave it at that. But certainly what I've found in recent years is that more and more enterprises, certainly the medium and large enterprises, are using a lot of the service provider design principles for their networks. So they actually have, okay, they have office networks and so forth, but organizations with multiple offices are building backbones that look very much like ISP backbones. They're running OSPF ISIS, they're running IBGP, and they're doing eBGP style traffic engineering like many network operators are doing as well. So yes, these techniques here are really applicable to anybody who needs to multi-home these days. What I'm going to try and get through, I don't know if I'm going to get through this in the time. I've got a large number of slides here, but we'll try and get through these. So we're going to look at the reasons for multi-homing first, some of the definitions and the options available, how to go about it, and then looking at some of the basic principles, looking at the IP addressing. A lot of people forget about IP addressing when it comes to doing traffic engineering. They forget about things like NetFlow. You know, Paolo mentioned NetFlow as being pretty important in his presentations during the plenary. I mean, he'll be doing a tutorial this afternoon on how NetFlow can be used and helpful in a lot of situations like this. So we'll cover that, and hopefully we'll get into the basic multi-homing piece before the tea break. So we'll get started in that probably. And then afterward, after the tea break, we'll look at service provider multi-homing. So that's just getting into slightly more sophisticated examples. I mean, they're still simple, but it's just making it slightly more complicated, more typical scenarios, which hopefully will be translated back into real life. Then final one is using BGP communities. I'm hoping I can go through that. as you know, as many folks have said, and I've said in previous venues as well, I think I said in the keynote on Sunday, using BGP communities were one of the biggest lifesavers for us when they first appeared. They were introduced in Cisco iOS probably mid-1996, thereabouts. I don't remember anymore because pretty much any new feature that was coded up and appeared in iOS, we were downloading it and trying it on our network, which is not really a best practice these days. But back then, we were so desperate for some of the new features, some of the labor-saving concepts that we were trying out new stuff pretty much as soon as it appeared. So the BGP community was very, very useful for us as a policy tool. And so again, over the years, pretty much any ISP I've helped or come to touch or, they want advice on the network, the first questions I'm asking, the first advice I'm giving is always, well, what are your BGP communities? And it's still, even today, some people go, oh, I can't use communities, they're too complicated. When in actual fact, they're actually very, very simple. I mean, they make BGP operation, BGP configuration very straightforward. Anyway, hopefully there'll be time to do the few slides I have with those. Right, so why we're multi-homing? This is all about redundancy, diversity, and reliability. That's really what we're trying to do it. Redundancy is the important thing because, of course, if we have one connection to the internet, it means that the network is dependent on the local router, it's dependent on the WAN media, it's dependent on the upstream service provider as well. Now, I've just listed some of the possibilities here. And the local router, of course, can be a configuration issue. I mean, I'm sure you've noticed the most reliable times in the network are during public holidays. You must have noticed that. Suddenly if it's like a national holiday or something, there are never any network outages. Quite interesting, really, isn't it? So it must, it's not like the router suddenly go, oh, it's a national holiday, I'm going to behave. It's a national holiday because nobody's in the office fiddling around with the configuration. Or they're not fiddling around, they're not changing things in the comms room and so forth. And, I mean, many of us have said this for years and years, and I think it was Renesas were doing some, I remember it was one of their presentations a few years ago, I think it was Renesas, who noticed, there's that instability in the internet, and then it was particular, national or even regional holidays or international holidays that somebody said, oh, the network instability has gone way down on those particular days. So yes, configuration of the router, what could seem to be an innocent change might have fairly far-reaching consequences. I remember in my early days of joining Cisco, I think it was 98, 99, and I was talking to an Australian ISP, and I was talking about some of the new features, and they were running a pretty recent Cisco iOS, and I was talking to the chief engineer, and I said, oh yeah, this new thing that does this, I don't remember what it was. And he said, oh, great, let me go and try it out. And this was during the day, so he went and tried it out, crash. The router actually crashed. I don't know what they had that conflicted, but they'd obviously tickled some kind of bug. So this was like their core router in Sydney that took out, I don't know, half of the Australian internet. So it's innocent things like this, configuration errors or innocent changes that you think may not cause any issue that could tickle problems with the software or with the actual configuration itself. Of course, the hardware is always an issue also. The vendors always say, perfect, we'll give you 2-year warranty, the equipment will never break and all this type of thing, which we all know is simply not true. As with any hardware, certainly these days, you find integrated circuits of, the motherboards and so forth are all like multi-layer. It's no longer the single layer. It's no longer the fat circuits drawn onto the circuit board. It's no longer simple chips. These are really, really high performance chipsets and so forth. They've got very little tolerance for electrical noise and this type of thing. It was a favorite thing that we had going through the 90s and early 2000s of, oh yeah, it must be solar activity or something like that caused the router to crash. That was one of the excuses we got back from one of our vendors. solar activity, there were big solar flares, and yes, that's why there's nothing wrong with the hardware at all. And we would send the hardware back, and they found no problem with it. And of course, they sent us something new, but it was just peculiar that that was the kind of excuse. And it could have been real, I don't know, but it just seemed a bit far-fetched, given it was in a comms room and all shielded and everything else. So,
since you mentioned solar activity, there will be nearly 10 days of outage in satellite network for 10 minutes, 5 minutes per day.
Yes, yeah. I mean, the satellite outages are other classics as well. I mean, I'm helping an ISP in the South Pacific at the moment, and they didn't actually realize that there's a particular alignment of the sun on the satellite in their dish that wipes them out for whatever it was. It's like, 10, 15 minutes, as you were saying. I know they were getting really angry on the phone to the ISP, and it's like, well, the sun is there, the satellite's here, Earth is here, your dish is pointing straight at the sun, and the satellite's in the middle. I think the sun is slightly stronger solar, electromagnetic radiation than the satellite is. So I think your dish is going to have a problem hearing what the satellite's sending. I mean, that's very, very typical, the physical or carrier failures that people didn't realize. So anyway, we're getting to WAN media. I mean, I was laughing about people stealing copper. Well, I wasn't laughing about it, but I was mentioning people stealing copper. Stealing the fiber optic, thinking it was copper. I mean, I've seen that in Bangladesh and Pakistan, parts of India, Bhutan, Nepal, where people just see, because a lot of the fibers put alongside the roads or the railways is not buried. In fact, one case coming out of Bhutan and going, where was it going to? Calcutta. The fiber optic literally goes along the roadside, and it frequently disappeared because people thought it was copper. They cut it, oh, it's glass. No, can't do anything with it. But even going to other parts of the world, we talked about satellites failing. There was a satellite in the South Pacific, one of the Intelsats failed. I mean, that knocked out half the South Pacific. And of course, all of those guys, satellite completely reliable, and they only ever had one link. And I noticed a big increase in people multi-homing, getting 2 separate satellite connections. We've had the issues I mentioned on Sunday, crossing the Atlantic Ocean, TAT10, TAT11, and one of our circuits being restored, also PTAT and TAT10, I think it was, and one of the circuits not being restored as it should have been. So both our infrastructure was in PTAT. And then when PTAT failed, we lost all our connectivity. And the operators of the long-haul circuits, all reliable and all the rest, but there's always a bit of a risk there. It just depends how much reliability you put in your network. When I look at, say, the likes of Micronesia, there's just one fiber running along the Federated States of Micronesia to Guam. And those guys, it's all reliable and so forth. Well, what happens when a ship's anchor or something happens? Oh, well, but it's not going to happen. There are no ships around about here. Well, we've seen all these. We've known of all the ship anchors and so forth off the coast of Egypt. We've known what happened in Pakistan. We know what happened in Bangladesh. We know what happened with the Taiwanese earthquake. There are 9 fibers going between Taiwan and the Philippines. There's a major earthquake that cut 8 of the 9 fibers that go between. It's a narrow strait between Taiwan and the Philippines, and cut 8 of the 9 fibers that go from Asia pretty much to North America. Of course, the result of that has been great business for this part of the world, because operators in Asia are now looking at getting capacity this way as well. There are lots of others. We had fun ones in the UK. We were in Cambridge, which is the east coast, southeast. And things that we found, we had to get microwave, because the science park in Cambridge, only British Telecom could put fibre in there, so we had to get microwave from Cable and Wireless in. But the microwave frequencies seemed to be the same size as the fog particles. So every time it was foggy, our microwave would be very unreliable, if not working at all. And that was one that just caused us endless issues. It's just the size of the water droplets. Well, your microwave cookers. The way the microwave cooker works by vibrating the water molecules in your food. Well, guess what? The water molecules in fog are apparently the same size as whatever microwave frequency cable and wireless we're using. Upstream service provider, well, there's the whole stories here. If you're based in Europe, you're connecting to a North American service provider. When's your business day? Well, 9 a.m., 5 p.m., give or take. When's the North American business day? Well, guess what? 9 a.m., 5 p.m., give or take. But there's a 5-hour time difference. When do they do the maintenance? 4 a.m., 7 a.m. 4 a.m., 7 a.m., East Coast, US, is 9 a.m. to 12 noon in UK. 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. in continental Europe. And if you're a UK-based provider providing internet access for continental Europe, connecting to a North American provider who decides to shut down the Washington POP from 4 a.m. to 7 a.m., you're stuffed, literally. And we were several times. So that's the type of thing. And WARD's a lot better these days. The international provider is actually sensitive to time zones. Not back in the 90s as was, the North Americans, yeah, we're the world, and, well, the rest of you don't really matter. But being cut off for 2-3 hours while they did the maintenance was not much fun. And of course, there's the maintenance issue, configuration, software, hardware. Unet had loads of problems with their Cisco routers because of all the frame relay and ATM that they were doing. Their network got really unstable, and it impacted us, sitting there in Europe. We felt these outages and so forth. When their IBGP collapsed because of the full mesh, then that affected us as well. We felt that pretty badly. So all these things, when you start listing them out like that, all what could go wrong, anybody who's trying to provide a reliable service to their end users is going to have to look really seriously at the redundancy they're supplying. In 1993, we were providing 99.5% availability. Now, if you look at the equipment then compared with what it is now, nowadays we talk about 3 nines, 4 nines, 5 nines, and all the rest. And, it should be, given how good the equipment is compared with the stuff that we were using. I mentioned on Sunday, the Cisco AGS Plus, and, you injured yourself every time you opened the box. Those are very, very basic bits of equipment. So I said reliability, business critical applications demand continuous availability, because if you don't have redundancy, you don't get reliability, and that means loss of revenue. And this is why I was saying you find a lot of enterprises are now operating their backbones the same way as service providers do, because internet is business critical for them. I don't really know anybody anymore who says, internet doesn't matter to me. We all heard about people getting withdrawal symptoms, they get I was going to pick up my phone and say, you get withdrawal symptoms and this doesn't work. Things like Facebook or whatever your social media of choice is. People get fidgety, all the teenagers and so on of today are desperate for their mobile device. And so folks who are never really accustomed to providing continuous availability are really having to work hard to make sure they do that. Another reason, of course, supplier diversity. Many businesses demanding supplier diversity as a matter of course. This was funny doing this slide when I was working for a vendor, because people normally would say, but hang about, you work for Cisco, why are you saying getting 2 of everything? Does that mean I should be buying Juniper? I was like, if that's 2 of everything, then go for it. But seriously, that you find most of the tier 1 operators today have a dual vendor policy. For the reasons that they don't want to be stuck in Cisco bugs or Alcatel-Lucent bugs or Juniper bugs or whatever. And certainly the early UUNet, when I was leaving to join Cisco, you found that they would have Cisco Juniper boxes side by side in the network. And that, of course, brought its own issues, interoperability and so forth, which, well, we'll talk about another time. But, internet connection from 2 or more suppliers, 2 or more diverse WAN paths. I do mean diverse. I don't just mean 2 separate circuits that disappear out your building, because what could well happen is they end up in the same duct, and then just need somebody with an excavator to come along and break them. 2 more exit points, 2 more international connections, pretty much 2 of everything. And, a symptom of us traveling far too much is that You know, as I said the other day, how many aircraft do you see flying around on one engine? Not many. In most commercial jets have at least two, for a pretty good reason. Okay, not supplies diversity, but for the redundancy issue. So there's two of everything within the infrastructure. Another reason, well, it's not really a reason, but it's playing one ISP off against the other one for things like service quality, service offerings, and availability. You know, if you know that you're the sole supplier for a customer, how much effort do you make to ensure that what you're providing them is the best it could be? You kind of go, yeah, well, send invoice, money arrives, send invoice, money arrives, you know, it's working, it's good enough. But when you know that you're in a competitive situation with another operator, then you do really work pretty hard to make sure that the quality of your service and your service offerings are up to scratch. I've worked with so many providers over the years. You know, they've just got one upstream, they're so excited about it until they tell me how much they're paying. And I just go, wow, you're paying that much for 64K bits per second? I can buy 155 megabits for the same price, say going from London to New York or something. And they go, ooh, why, what's happening? I said, well, because you just went to somebody, give me a price, they gave you a price. You know, they just write it on an envelope and hope that you'll accept it because they know there isn't any competitive bid. So when you have connected two different upstreams, you have a very, very good opportunity to compare the service offering from a couple of the upstreams. You know, how good upstream A's transited versus upstream B's transit. There's another reason which I really must put on a slide, and I haven't done so yet, and that is changing your upstream provider. If you're multi-homed, changing your upstream is easy, because all you're doing is, you've got two upstreams, you're adding a third one in. Once you've got the link to the third one up and running and everything is fine and happy, you can get rid of the first or the second one. Whereas if you've just got a single connection, you have got to move that connection from wherever it is to the new location. And I've never seen anybody change an ISP without losing a packet. That's pretty hard. You know, my experience of changing ISPs have mounted to days. You know, I've worked with, again, ISPs in the Pacific, for example. They're the best examples. They're changing satellite providers. So, you know, they might be landing in Hong Kong and then they're moving it to Hawaii. Well, you know, trying to, you know, you're trying to get the address space announced. You know, you've got to make sure all the filters are up, all the announcements are made, and so forth. I've seen these transitions take 2 or 3 days to even happen. Even my own experiences in the very, very early UUNet days, moving POPs in New York or Washington, it would be taking days to move circuits. So if you're multi-homed, you can bring up this new connection without impacting anything that's running at the time. And then once the new connection is running, dropping the original one you want to drop is very, very straightforward. So it's another reason to multi-home. It's not like the reliability or redundancy region, but it's a very, very practical operational reason to do so. Must make a slide. Right, summary. So multi-homing is very easy to demand. You can, you know, your management can come along and say, we need to multi-home. But there's no magic BGP multi-home command in the router. So what we really need to look at is how we try and do this so we have the best impact on the network, best impact for the customers, and best impact on the internet, and really how we go about trying to do some things. So I'll just wander through some of the definitions and the options first. Definition of multi-homing, one link external to the local network. I mean, that's really all that multi-homing is about. And that might mean 2 or more links to the same ISP, or 2 or more links to different ISPs. Yeah, I mean, 2 links to the same ISP is considered multi-homing. It may not be from a regional registry point of view when they come to give you an AS number, but as far as BGP is concerned, multi-homing is more than one connection to another network. All these examples of 2 external-facing routers, you know, many times I've been through this tutorial, and people come to at the end and say, well, you know, I can't afford a second router. All the examples have got 2. Can I do this with 1? And then I go, back to this slide, and I say, well, what does this say? 2 of everything. Then I go back to the previous slide and say, local router. Do you realize if you've only got one router, you're entirely at the mercy of the configuration, the software, the hardware, and so forth. Oh, well, but you know, my vendor says. Yeah, well, you know, we know what the vendors say. Getting a second router is relatively straightforward. If your business is big enough that you can buy one router and have internet access and so forth, getting a second one, it's small investment compared with the actual redundancy that and reliability it will give you. And even from the small folks, I say, look, just get one off eBay. You know, you can get a pretty decent 5-year-old router that can run the latest software. It will do enough PPS for you, and it's just a few $100s. You know, it's a small investment compared with what it can actually give you for the network. You'll need an autonomous system number. This used to be a really simple slide until the ASN range was extended. So it used to be 16-bit, it's now a 32-bit range. That's the RFC here that described it, so that's the ITF document that pretty much explains what a 32-bit AS number is and the specification. The public ones are 1 to 64495. If you've been paying attention, I don't know, did Marcus Schmidt mention it yesterday? I think he did. There are only 495 autonomous system, 16-bit autonomous system numbers left. Right, it's not many. 64,000 have been handed out to the registries. Not all have been distributed yet, but IANA only has 495 left. And it's interesting, you know, you go to different parts of the world. So the RIPE NCC region, most new networks that need an autonomous system are getting a 32-bit one. So they get one out of this range here. But in North America, there are only 32-bit AS numbers being handed out, total. Apparently in the North American internet, 32-bit AS numbers don't work. They seem to work in the rest of the world, so I don't really know what the difference is, but obviously there's something really strange going on there. Now the thing is, you know, if you're using a 16-bit AS number and you get a customer coming along with a 32-bit, everything just works fine. The magic is this AS23456. Because your router can't be configured with these big numbers, you just talk BGP with 23456 instead. So it's a very, very simple trick. So rather than putting AS131072 in, or whatever the customer is, you just put in 23456 and everything works. And so it's very, very easy to talk to customers who have a 32-bit AS number. If you don't have an AS number at the moment and you get one from the RIPE NCC and it ends up being a big one, like 65552 upwards, then most modern router software, certainly within the last, let's say last 2013, last 3 years, will support 32-bit AS numbers. Cisco has been a bit of a laggard. You'll need the 15.0 iOS minimum before you get 32-bit AS numbers. But honestly, I was on the inside pushing this through, helping push this through, and it was not an easy task to persuade product managers and make a business case as to why iOS needed to support 32-bit AS numbers. I'm still bemused that the thing needed a business case. 10 years earlier, no business case would have been needed for a core BGP feature. Anyway, so that's the 32-bit AS numbers. 16-bit range, well, 45,000 are visible internet, around 500 left unassigned, as I mentioned. Of the 32 bits, 5,000 have been handed out, and there are about 3,900 are visible. We've also got private AS numbers, as I mentioned. One interesting thing happened a few weeks ago was there was a new range of private AS numbers set aside. So IETF set aside, what big stat? 294 million private AS numbers. Given there are only about 45,000 ASNs visible on the internet, setting aside 294 million, in my humble opinion, seems bizarrely excessive. I don't know mean, it's 294 million. I can't comprehend. We've only got 45,000 autonomous systems in use today. So anyway, some people are living in a dream world. I mean, yes, the private range here, 1,023, is a bit small, but going up to 294 million, I think is a bit strange. But anyway, so those are reserved. So the private AS use, where would you use them? If you've got customers multi-homed onto your backbone, that's a pretty good place to use private AS numbers. You won't get a public AS number from a registry. If you've got a customer who's connected to different POPs, so use a private AS number. And I'll show you how to do that a bit later. You find, I've mentioned already, a lot of corporates are copying ISP design for their backbones. So you get a typical thing where, you know, the backbone may be here, head office, and then you've got satellite or regional offices. Put them in their own AS. Put them in a private AS, they talk BGP, eBGP to head office, and it becomes a very simple configuration. You don't end up having to run OSPF all the way around the world. You can separate them into different autonomous systems like that. And of course, another place you use private ASs are within BGP confederations. I mean, nobody deploys BGP confederations new anymore. But you find that some of the tier ones, certainly from those who had BGP scaling problems in the mid-90s, they adopted BGP confederations because the right reflector wasn't available. And you find also that some of the confederation is really useful if you're on the acquisition trail. Right? If you've set up your network and you start buying ISPs. Because what you do then, the easiest migration is just to add them to your confederation. Right? So the outside world sees your AS, and it's very, very easy to absorb their AS in. Whereas if you're trying to change an AS number on a router, you've got to redo the whole configuration. So confederation has been used by some operators who have been buying smaller ISPs. It becomes very, very easy for them to add them in. But anyway, we're going to use private ASs for this, RFC 2270, and we'll show you how that works a bit later. Like private address space, private ASN should not be visible on the public internet. So, I mean, the Cisco command to do it is remove private AS. I forget off the top of my head what the Juniper one is, but it's quite similar. So that's stripping out private ASs, so remember to do that. Just put it as part of your regular eBGP configuration. Now, what else? Transit, carrying traffic across a network, usually done for a fee. Peering, exchanging locally sourced routing information and traffic, and that's usually for no fee, so that's the major difference. You pay for transit, peering is free. You know, some people get fussy about it because there is also paid peering. One or two major providers do what's called paid peering. That seems to be a victory for their accountants because what happens is, you know, maybe seasonal. So one season, one ISP is sending more traffic to the other one, so they get charged for it. And then the next season, the other ISP is sending more traffic back to the original one, so they send the bills. So it's like an exchange of invoices, which to me doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. But you know, some folks have a paid peering setup, but the vast majority, peering is for no fee. Also default, we're going to use default quite a bit, where to send traffic when there's no explicit match in the routing table. So configuring policy in iOS, we've got three basic principles here. I'm going to use prefix lists to filter prefixes, the filter list to handle ASNs, and the route maps to apply policy. Now, I'm going to start with this, keep it simple. Obviously, as configurations get more complicated, you find more people are starting to use route maps to filter prefixes and ASNs as well. But I want to just show some simple examples. Once you get the simple examples, building the more complicated ones becomes easier. The policy tools we have, we've got local preference for outbound traffic flows. That's about it, really. Local preference is about really the only way you can manipulate outbound traffic flows in your network. But if you remember from the BGP path selection process, local pref wins. I mean, local pref is pretty much the first thing that's checked. So you as the operator have got ultimate power in steering traffic out of your network. Metric or MED is used for handling inbound traffic flows. But it's only useful in the local scope. So it's only useful if you're connecting to, well, one AS, if you've got multiple links to another AS. And that's where the MED is used. And as we'll talk about a bit later on, MED is kind of, it had a bad history because the original BGP RFC didn't say what to do when the MED wasn't set. And of course, you can't compare an MED with a value and no MED. What do you do? If there's no MED, should it be MED 0 or should it be MED big? And some vendors decided big, other vendors decided 0. And you ended up with a bit of a mess. Whereas one ISP would assume MED 0, and the other one would assume MED big, and you ended up with traffic going the wrong way. AS path prepend is very popular. If you remember my routing report from Sunday, what was that AS that was doing 22 times prepend? Yes, the AS path prepend is visible across the whole internet. So me sitting in Brisbane in Australia, I will see your prepend. Because if it's the only path, the most specific prefix being prepended, then, well, I will see it. So AS path prepend is used quite a bit, but it artificially makes the AS seem longer than it really is. So that is internet scope. This is quite popular. Communities, very, very powerful policy tool used for specific inter-provider peering. So I'm hoping I can get to the end of this and we can look at some of the community examples because, the things have got to, probably in the last 6 or 7 years, I was just speaking to a major transit provider operating in Africa, and one of the requirements for an upstream provider is that they support an active BGP community policy, an active policy. It's not that I've just heard of them. They have active BGP community policy. And I see more and more mid-sized ISPs now requiring in RFPs for the tier 1s and tier 2s to explain what the community policy actually is. And if they have no communities, they're not connecting. I've seen it as bare as that. So these are very important. Now, originating prefixes, well, the assumptions we're going to make. Whatever address block you get, it's assumed that this is being announced to the internet as that. That's just one of the basic principles going back years and years and years. You get address space, you get an address block, it's assumed that you announce this address block to the internet. And there's still, there are many folks these days saying, but I only announce the address space that when my customer is using it. Well, that was the problem that we had with PSINet in the mid-90s when they were almost single-handedly trying to destroy the internet. What PSINet were doing were only announcing address space when the customers used it. In those days, it was dial-up, so people would be dialing in or whatever it was. Announcing a 24, get the email, hang up, 24 disappears. And I was talking about this with Nigel Titley. He was running BTNet when I was at Pipex, and he saw exactly the same problems in the UK. Huge amount of noise coming from a few providers in North America who were doing this dial-on-demand /24 type nonsense. So, and pretty much from then on, when flat damping appeared, it became part of internet best practices and the registry requirements that whenever you got an address block, that address block was announced to the internet. But the interesting thing is, the address block ensures that you have redundancy in case of any link failure. Minimum allocation is a /20 to a 24, depending on the registry. I don't know who's still left at doing a 20. Aaron is not anymore. I don't know about LACNIC and AFRINIC. I don't think it's that big. I need to check. But likes of APINIC, RIPE NCC, minimum is a /24 these days. Several ISPs are filtering the registry boundaries. There's still quite a few providers who do that. Remember, as I was saying the other day, that /24 is the smallest you can announce to the internet? Well, if you saw my routing report, 25 through to 32s, they're not many. But 24s, it's more than half of the BGP table. And it's the same in V6. 48 seems to be the minimum in V6. You don't see many 4950s all the way through to 64s in the V6 BGP table. Very few. 48 seems to be the boundary in V6. And so quite a few ISPs do filter on that particular boundary. And the registries have published the minimum here. These URLs, well, they're up to date the last time I looked at them. a few months ago. So that's where they published the minimum sizes. Net police, yeah, people doing the filtering. My only point on this slide is that, yes, quite a few providers filter on particular prefix boundaries. Like the former Class A space, they filter on /8. Not such a good idea because the former Class A space is used by the registries to hand out down to /24s. A lot of people filter the former B space on /16s. But again, a lot of people have taken their former B and chopped it into like 17s or 18s for traffic engineering purposes. So if you don't announce the covering aggregate, you don't get any connectivity. Anyway, so we'll jump on. How to multi-home? Yeah, this is important too, choosing between transit and peering. Transit, of course, is your operator that's used to give you full internet access. Now, the transit provider could be local or regional, but it's more usually giving you the whole internet. You need to pick your transit providers really wisely. If you've only got one, you've got no redundancy. If you've got too many, you can't load balance. And there's no real economy of scale either. And the simple fact is, it costs more per megabit per second the smaller the connections get. And it becomes really hard to provide any service quality. Well, the most challenging one I've helped with has been an operator who had 15 transit providers. And I got the email, "Oh, Philip, can you help me do my traffic engineering?" Basically, the problem they had was when a customer complained about bad connection to somewhere, they put in a circuit to somewhere. And then they announced all the address space out somewhere, which then broke the connectivity for everybody else. So they kept adding circuits as the connectivity broke for the different customers. And it was a major mess. And they had all these small circuits going to all around the world. And so it was really, well, okay, can you get rid of some of these? Maybe just go down to 3. 3 we can do. 3 transit providers. What was sad was they had not a single peer. They paid for all their internet transit, not a single peer at all. And the recommendation, at least 2, no more than 3. If you've got 2 upstreams, it becomes very, very straightforward to do your load balancing, traffic engineering, great economy of scale. You need to pick 2 good places to go. Not necessarily tier 1s. Not necessarily tier 1s, but the 2 who are going to give you the best access to what your customers are looking at. And quite often you find if you go to 2 tier 1s and they're both in, say, North America or both sitting in Europe, then, well, you probably have a big challenge trying to load balance between the two incoming. Whereas what I see most people in this part of the world tend to do is head east, head west. And then the one that's sitting in the west gives you all the west content, the one sitting in the east gives you all the east content. And that seems to be at least a lot better for most. So I see this, Middle East, Africa, South Asia tend to go east-west. If they have 2. And if they have a third one that tends to be more regional access, so regional transit. But common mistakes, sign up with too many transit providers, lots of little circuits, they cost a lot of money. Transit rates generally get cheaper with increasing capacity. What you pay per megabit on a 2.5 gig circuit is probably a fraction of what you pay, say, on a 155 megabit circuit. And it becomes really hard to do reliable traffic engineering that doesn't need daily fine-tuning. And some of the folks who've got 10, 15 transit providers end up taking their address block and announcing different 24s out of different paths to try and get it to balance. And the problem is it's fine announcing 124 one path as long as that's one customer. That one customer may have most of their stuff wherever. But if it's shared between lots of customers or it ends up being on a broadband aggregation, NAT box or something, you end up causing a nightmare for at least some portion of the customers on the link. Other common mistake is no diversity. This was a classic when I wrote this one in after the Taiwanese earthquake. Because people, oh yeah, we're diverse, we're on all these different cables that go from Hong Kong to the US via Japan. Yeah, but those 8 cables all go between Taiwan and the Philippines. And so a lot of those operators, even though they were diverse, they lost all their international capacity. You know, we were obsessive about it in the UK. We were absolutely obsessive about it. We would have 6 monthly meetings with British Telecom and Cable and Wireless. They'd both come into the office, they would both sit in the same meeting room, and they would bring their cable maps, their fibre map, and they would tell us exactly where a fibre went from London, Cambridge, all the way out Cornwall in the UK, across the Atlantic, where it would come in Newfoundland. And we didn't even want the two cables, one Newfoundland, one somewhere else. We wanted them separate. And after one outage, we discovered that both our cables to New York went alongside some railroad between New York and Washington. We were kind of, how can the New York circuit be going via Washington? When it comes, if you know the geography, it comes in Newfoundland and goes down the east coast of the US. And New York is first before Washington. So it's stuff like that. It pays being obsessive about where the fiber actually goes. Because that way, remember, we were trying to meet our 99.5% availability. So we were quite obsessive about this. Chosen transit providers all reach over the same satellite or submarine cable. Chosen transit providers have poor onward transit peering. You get a great price from your upstream provider, but their connections are rubbish. So yeah, you may get a great price, but if their upstreams are letting you down, then it's not a great price at all. It just causes you more of a headache. Peers. Peer, another autonomous system where you exchange your prefixes with. So it's just the locally sourced routes and traffic are exchanged. So you either get private peering, so it's a private link between two providers, that's pretty common. Usually between two competitors. You also get public peering, that's more common. Internet exchange point is what the public peering place is, where providers meet and freely decide who they'll interconnect with. The internet is made up of peering. Without peering, we would have had no internet that we know today. So you find, the most vibrant, most active part of the internet is really where internet exchange points are. So the recommendation, of course, is peer as much as possible. I haven't got it in the slide here, but there's putting your autonomous system and contact details up in the peering database, peeringdb.com. That's extremely important for any network operator. If you're not there, nobody knows who you are. And the second thing that's really important, you've probably heard of the Global Peering Forum. If you haven't, or you're not aware of anybody in your organization who's going there, make sure somebody in your organization goes there, especially if you've got an international network or you're going to international locations, because that's where all the peering coordinators meet. They meet in pretty exotic locations from time to time. And I noticed, some of the GPF, they hired a cruise ship and went cruising around the Caribbean for 3 days. Now, it's not sitting on the deck and enjoying the sun and all the parties and so forth. Apparently, they actually spent most of the time doing an awful lot of business, so setting up peering agreements and so forth. If you're in the business of peering, sending somebody an email and saying, hey, can I peer with you, kind of ends up, yeah, I'll deal with it. I don't know who that is, delete. That's usually what happens. But if you meet the person and do you're such and such in your network and this and that, remember me, and exchange business cards and all the rest, you get to know somebody socially. When you send them an email saying, hey, can we peer our networks? Oh yeah, I remember them from whatever. And it's more likely to set up the peering. It's really important. The face-to-face meeting is so important in the internet business for getting peering up and going. So I hammer on about peering as much as possible. Peer as much as you can. It's pretty rare for transit to cost less than peering. Private peer, you look at the price of the link and all the rest. This is generally done between two local operators serving the same community. They may be serious competitors, but you leave that to the sales and the marketing guys. As far as technical goes, you know that your round-trip times, your QoS, the bandwidth between the two of you is pretty much unlimited. So you can give both your customers the best possible experience. And of course, the exchange point just facilitates that further. Anyway, common mistakes: mistaking a transit provider's exchange business for no-cost public peering point, You know, there are lots of those. I suppose the most famous one is the Singapore Telecom Exchange Point in Singapore, which is actually just Singtel's transit business. No exchange point at all. It's no free peering. You pay for all your traffic. You cannot decide who you peer with, and it costs you money to get into their building. So that's, you know, there are quite a few of those exchanges, so-called, wandering around the world. If the exchange point's not free, then it's not an exchange point, pretty much. Obviously, you've got to pay for, like, you know, air conditioning and remote hands and putting your router into rack space and so forth. But that's generally just an annual facilities cost. Other ones I've seen is, you know, people have turned up in London or in Frankfurt and bought transit there. They've not actually gone to any of the exchange points. It's like, well, you're in there, you can get 70% of your traffic from the exchange point. Why are you paying for it? Oh, well, you know, it doesn't suit my business model or something. It's like, what kind of business model spends money? I can't figure this one out either. But anyway, I've seen quite a few providers who simply don't go to exchange points, even though they're physically in the same building as the exchange. It's like, all you need to do is run a cross-connect up to the exchange point switch, plug it in, set up your BGP sessions with the folks there. Most people at exchanges will peer with you. It's only really the biggest providers who'll be fussy about the peering. That again, if you look at the peering database, you can see the different peering policies of the different providers, and you'll see the biggest ones will have what's called a closed peering policy. Closed means they choose who they peer with. But the vast majority of medium and small providers have an open peering policy, which means they will peer with anybody who wants to peer with them, because they want to avoid having to pay their transit provider for traffic as well. Other common mistakes: ignoring, avoiding competitors because they're the competition. Yes, they are the competition. You're not going to drive them out of business. They're not going to drive you out of business. So you have to learn that you're going to both be dealing in the same market. Leave it to the sales guys. Leave it to the marketing people. They can do all the fancy stuff that they want. But technically, interconnecting the two networks, run fiber between the two networks, run it at the biggest speed that you can, because that gives the customers a much better experience. Anyway, moving on. Different scenarios. We're going to look at stub network, multi-home stub, multi-homed, and multiple sessions to another AS. So this situation, we have got upstream provider here, we've got a customer there. They are multi-homed, the two links, but it's only going from one router to one router in the upstream. So there's no real need, well, you can do this with BGP, but there's no real need to run BGP. In fact, all you need to do here is just have two static routes. So static default going to the upstream, and the upstream, of course, points a static route, two static routes for the address space of the customer. So no need for BGP in this situation. With this one, here you've got two links that go to two different routers in the upstream. It might be two different routers, two different POPs, two different locations, but it's all still in the upstream autonomous system. BGP. You do want BGP for this. Now notice I've got a private AS number in here. You won't get a public AS number from the registries. The registries are very clear, the policy is very clear that a public AS number is only given when you're connecting to two other distinct networks, or at least two other distinct networks. So here you're only connecting to one, so a private AS number is just fine. This is the RFC 2270 type situation I mentioned. But you do want to use BGP here. Don't use OSPF, don't use static routes. I mean, OSPF is an interior gateway protocol. Interior means inside the AS. This is not inside the AS. I mean, I've seen situations, I've experienced situations where we run OSPF here, we run OSPF there, and we run OSPF in the middle. And we end up with all the prefixes here bleeding through to the upstream ISP, and all the upstream ISPs, point-to-point prefixes, bleeding into the customer. Happened to me too. I went away on holiday for 2 weeks. You see, it's always a bad thing to go on holiday. I went on holiday for 2 weeks, came back, it's like, what are all these /30s in our backbone IGP doing? oh, well, sales guys came along and we needed a multi-homing solution and we couldn't figure out how to do it, so we just ran OSPF to the customer. Well, yes, OSPF to the customer would work, but the only problem is this OSPF here was sending all the prefixes from, this was a pretty big UK network. They had more point-to-point links and entries in OSPF than we had. And suddenly our OSPF had grown from about 300 prefixes to 3,000. Not happy. So the right way to do it, of course, is BGP. In some of my bits getting IXs set up, forget which exchange point it was now. They were using RIP to peer between the ISPs. They were actually, so there was an exchange point, and RIP was the routing protocol used in the IX because nobody knew how to do BGP. So you come across some crazy things that people are trying to do. So BGP, Border Gateway Protocol, is designed to talk between different autonomous systems, different distinct networks. If you have something like this, well, of course, you're sitting in the S100, you've got one link to one upstream, two links to another upstream, global internet. As I said, there's no magic BGP multi-home command. Right? The companies who come along and sell you multi-homing solutions, and they'll put boxes in your network that will fine-tune your multi-homing. But as I was saying in the keynote, learn BGP. It really isn't that hard to start off. Right? The more complicated your network is, the more complicated your upstream connections are, then yes, you're digging yourself a hole in making BGP really, really complex. But for something like this is very, very simple to actually set up and have running properly. Okay, this one. What do you do when you've got multiple links between autonomous systems? For example, you're here, you're peering with somebody or connected to somebody, and you're using 3 parallel links like that. What do you do? Well, there are many ways of doing this. And the favorite these days, and it's pretty much, I won't say a best practice, but it's a common practice, is that people use something called eBGP multihop. Now, eBGP specification, or BGP specification, says that external BGP runs point-to-point, between direct connected peers. Right? That's a specification. eBGP multihop breaks the spec. It goes against the BGP specification, because what it says is the neighbor is going to be not directly connected. Neighbor of router A is not physically connected. We're going to peer router A, we've got intermediate links, and router B. They're not a direct connection. So to load balance on parallel links, we're going to set up eBGP between the loopbacks instead. And all we're going to do is run it between the loopbacks. We have a static route pointing to the loopback on each of the physical connections. Here it's a serial interface, or it could be an optical interface, and that works fine. If you've got Ethernet connections to your upstream, you're kind of stuffed. You can't do this. You can't point static routes to a broadcast interface. But when you have point-to-point link like this, very simple, static route pointing to the physical interfaces, and then we set up BGP between the loopbacks. And because they're not directly connected, we have to break the spec and say, well, the eBGP neighbor is 2 hops away. Because it is 2 hops. If it's physically connected, it's 1 hop. Because they're not physically connected, loopback, this link there is 2 hops. Right, so that's eBGP multi-hop. And what happens here is we've got one BGP session running between the 2 routers. And so the routers will then load share the traffic between A and B over those 3 connections. That's probably the best way of trying to do the load balancing. In my day, I kind of avoided this. I would be using boxes here, just sort of muxes. So rather than running 3 links into my router and doing eBGP multi-hop, I would buy a multiplex, put it at each end of the link, and then put the mux trunk into the router on a higher speed interface. But this is fine if you're in control of both ends of the link. When you're connecting to an upstream provider who may be in another country or another continent, it's not so straightforward to do. So you tend to find people are using eBGP multi-hop. Common mistake, is people point the route to the remote loopback, they pointed to an IP address. You need to point it to the physical interface. If you point to the IP address, these links break, you have another path, the eBGP session will be maintained over the other path, and I'll show that in the next slide. The other common mistake, which I didn't mention, is people don't count the number of hops. They put 255 in here. That means the eBGP session can be established over 255 hops, which means it could be anywhere in the world at all. And here's the problem. This is why I really don't like eBGP multi-hop much at all. Oh, this is exciting. This is very exciting. Microsoft error reporting. Don't you love PowerPoint? Okay. Give me back PowerPoint. No. Microsoft has encountered a problem. Oh. Sorry about this. Wonder what it could be. I only just pressed next slide and I came up with an error. Okay, where am I? I am here. I am here. Right. Hopefully nothing now. Okay, so this is the issue. If you've got eBGP multi-hop 2 and you're pointing a static route not at the physical interface, but at a remote address, say router 1 is a static route pointing to the address on router 3, this is also 2 hops away, right? It goes 1, 2. And I've come across this situation lots of times, and we did it for customers as well. And it was quite often, this link here would fail, the eBGP would be maintained over the backup path, and the customer wouldn't really notice because he wasn't watching the link or anything like that. So this is a real danger that, if you've got multi-home customer, you're running one eBGP session, the main link goes down, the eBGP is maintained over the backup path, even with the multi-hop of 2. And of course, if you're not using multi-hop of 2, but a bigger number, it can be maintained over a much more diverse infrastructure. So this usually happens when routing to the remote loopback is dynamic rather than static pointing to the link. So that's something that has to be watched. In fact, the general advice is to try and avoid using eBGP multi-hop as much as possible, unless it's absolutely necessary. You need it for things like load sharing across multiple links, maybe across satellite infrastructure, because you quite often find that satellite modems are layer 3 devices but can't talk BGP, so you need to multi-hop over them. In fact, if you need to multi-hop over any layer 3 devices between your 2 eBGP speakers. Quite a lot of researchers will use it, or if you're using Team Cymru's Bogon BGP feed, that's delivered by an eBGP multi-hop as well, because their router is not directly connected to yours. Here's one statement from a tier 1 provider from a few years ago. I don't know, they had a big argument with one of their customers, and the customer came to us and said, can you help persuade these tier 1? They're just being stupid. Our policy is to use eBGP multi-hop, and they're refusing to accept it, and etc., etc. And we went and asked the tech, and he said, well, we'll run eBGP multi-hop, but basically customers are clueless. That's what they said. And we said, well, we can't tell your customer that they're clueless. What's the statement? So he was saying, don't support it as a standard offering because customers generally have a hard time managing it due to routing loops and failure to realize that BGP session stability problems are caused by connectivity problems between the CPE and their BGP speaker. So these have been some of the issues that folks use. So, I find that many of the operators I've talked to will only use eBGP multi-hop as a last resort, whereas others say they will only use eBGP multi-hop, even when the routers are directly connected. And I'm saying, well, why? And I show them this slide and say, don't you realize this is an issue? Oh yeah, but this won't happen to us. Well, eBGP multi-hop was a hack introduced by a Cisco engineer to work around a particular issue that in 1993 or whenever it was. It's not part of the spec. But anyway, so be very careful if you do find you have to use this, because there are quite a lot of caveats. Having a layer 3 device in the middle means it needs to have some kind of routing as well. And what you often find happening, apart from this not knowing if links go down, is that the layer 3 device may have static defaults in it that point in the wrong direction. You end up traffic bouncing between the satellite modem and your BGP speaker because the routing's not right. So you do need to be very careful. Of course, the other way that you could do it, do multiple sessions between providers or between routers, is use BGP multipath. Now that was great when it came out and the BGP table was 3,000 prefixes. These days, when it's 470,000, you end up with 3 copies of the full BGP table going into the fib, in the forwarding table. So, 3 times 470,000 is quick, well, big. Okay? It's 3 times 21, so 1.4 million paths going into your forwarding table. Now, if your router can't handle a forwarding table with 1.4 million paths, you might end up having a bit of a problem. So this could be useful going from you to an end customer who maybe only uses a default route and not much else, because it does put 3, or whatever number you choose. You've got 3 links here, and it'll put 3 in. But notice it only does it if you've got 3 links to the same AS. It will do per destination load balancing. Some people do this and then turn on per packet load balancing and wonder why the router CPU goes to 100%, or the line card CPU goes to 100%, or that video stops working, or audio just goes completely messy. So this one, I was a fan when it first appeared in the mid-90s, but now I'm kind of, don't know. It's generally better to do the link aggregation as low as you can with infrastructure and leave BGP to do what it's good at. And multiple sessions to an AS. Simplest is generally to try and use defaults. So all the examples I'm going to show you next will be using defaults as much as we can. There's very little case for carrying the full BGP table around to do multi-homing. Right. Some principles. Let's try and learn to walk. So obvious things. We announce address space, it attracts traffic. If you announce address space and it doesn't attract traffic, then your upstream is probably messing around somehow. Announcing an aggregate on the link will result in traffic for that aggregate coming in the link. Announcing a sub-prefix of an aggregate on the link means that all the traffic for that sub-prefix will come in that link, even if the aggregate is going somewhere else. Doing a huge AS path prepend on a sub-prefix will not make it less important. The AS path length doesn't matter. AS path length does not win over size of the subnet. Subnet size wins first. Okay, most specific announcement wins. So that's the basic principle. To split traffic between 2 links, we announce the aggregate in both links, and that gives us our redundancy. That's always important. Whatever external link you have to another AS, make sure you announce your aggregate. If one link fails, that aggregate announcement gives you your backup. And that's probably some of the most common mistakes that people make. Newcomers to BGP, multi-homing, forget to announce aggregates. Right, so it's very important, always announce the aggregate. Right, so, and then, how do you load balance of 2 links? Well, you don't go, oh, complicated, don't know what customers are going to be doing. Take the aggregate, divide it into 2 pieces. Just divide it into 2 pieces, announce 1/2 of the address space in each link. So you start with that, see what you get. And okay, if you just get all the traffic in one link and nothing in the other one, then well, at least you started with somewhere. When you learn, when you learn to juggle, the person who's teaching you doesn't give you 7 things to juggle with. They give you one and they go, do this type of thing. And then, then do it without looking, and then they give you two things, and so on and so on. So we wanted to start with something nice and simple, see how it goes. So split the address space into two, one half one link, one half the other. At least you're still announcing an aggregate, so link failure means you have the backup. And so on and so on. So I'm going to take this thought, and we're going to use that thought through the rest of the slides. Key to successful multi-homing: keep traffic engineering prefix announcements independent of your customers. Customers come and go. Links go up and down, they go on holiday, they go home for the night, switch off the router, all this kind of stuff. So taking the customer 24s and leaking them out to the internet doesn't really help with your traffic engineering, because it'll just flop around all over the place. Generally, if you've got a covering aggregate, dividing it into half or quarters is the most that you really need to do. Certainly, all the providers have helped for the last 15 years or so. We've never needed to chop it into more than halves or quarters. And these are small networks to very, very big networks. Okay, so these are the keys: understanding how to announce aggregates, understanding the purpose of announcing sub-prefix or aggregates, understanding how to manipulate BGP attributes, and avoiding too many upstreams. Address planning is important as well. IP address planning should not be left to the sales guys. Sales guys sell internet services. But again, I find several ISPs, the network engineering, network operation function is not in control of the address space. They leave the address space. Oh, but the customers use the address space. I leave it to the sales guys. Well, your address space is what your customers are using to generate traffic on the internet. So if you don't plan your address allocation, it's going to mess up your multi-homing. So IP address planning is actually a really, really important part. You usually have to have gone through these slides with some ISPs, when I've done the workshop or training for them. They say, it'd be good if we could renumber our whole network, because they have had no address planning whatsoever. Right? We separate address space into customer, the point-to-point link to customers. So this address space attracts traffic. Infrastructure, that's between your routers, doesn't attract traffic. Right? Your routers aren't going to download from YouTube or whatever else they do. Right? So infrastructure point-to-point links and your loopbacks don't attract traffic. So we don't really care about those. But planning the customer assignments, as I say here, is actually very, very important. If you don't plan, you end up with something like this. You've got your aggregate, your 21, and you just do customer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and so on. How do you do traffic engineering for this? Well, the previous principle I said was, take the aggregate, divide into two. Announce this half on one link, this half on the other link. Of course, with the covering aggregate. Where does all the traffic go? Comes on this side. No traffic on that side. So how do you load balance? Well, you then end up with taking the address space and chopping it here. Add customer number 6, you have to move the chop. Customer 7, move it, move it. Every customer you had, you end up having to change your load balancing. What's the story? A lazy engineer is a good engineer. No, a good engineer is a lazy engineer. The best network engineers are lazy. They design it right the first time. They don't want to create work for themselves. Sales add another customer. Fiddle, fiddle, fiddle with the BGP. But so many people do that. And I'm like, why? Just get it set up right the first time. Then you can go and do something else more interesting, rather than fiddling with the multi-homing. So doing it this way doesn't make sense. Doing it this way, if you've got two upstream links, makes more sense. Right? First customer here, second there, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10. Because if you take the aggregate, divide into two pieces, you've got a 22 going out one link, 22 going out the other link. Each time you add a customer, there's no change. No real change that you have to make at all. And the thing is, this could be a commercial customer, so you add all your commercials here. This could be your residentials, add all your residentials there. And the residentials don't pay you much money. They expect to get endless bandwidth for nothing. Whereas your commercials expect to get what they paid for, and it works all the time. So you've got competing needs. So if your residentials fill up their link and it's full and congested, well, too bad. They're only paying $10 or whatever a month. whereas your commercials are paying 100 times that much. And yes, if the link fills up, give them more space and give these people less. So paying very close attention to the address planning is actually very important to get the load balancing done right. So, you know, if you have the luxury of starting with a new address block, you can do it this way, and it makes the load balancing easier. You know, I've been really lucky with some of the providers of help. We've been able to do stuff like this. Renumbering broadband pools is really easy. Very, very easy. And, you know, I've been fortunate that most of the commercials have been this side. They've had some broadband pools mixed in as well. So, right, okay, we're going to move the broadband pools up here. It's very easy to renumber. Just the maintenance. We'll do a 4 AM maintenance, change the pool, shut the broadband router down, bring it back up again. Everybody gets new addresses. Life goes on. But we've fixed the load balancing at one fairly easy maintenance slot. So this works fine if you're multi-homing between 2 upstreams. If you've got 3, just divide it into 3. Okay, I know you can't divide, say, a /21 into 3 pieces, but you can make it a 22 and 2 23s, for example. You know, it just depends. But try and think creatively that way, and try not to have to redesign your load balancing every single time. Don't forget to announce the aggregate. That's what's important. Now, to the examples. So we'll try some simple worked examples first. No frills, going to look at 2 cases, multi-homing with the same ISP and then multi-homing with different ISPs. Going to keep it simple. Right? I'm going to assume that I'm using a /19 address block. Please don't ask me about IPv6. IPv6 multi-homing is exactly the same as for IPv4, only the addresses look different. And it's quite funny, sometimes I submit this tutorial to different operations groups, and people, the PC go, Philip should include some IPv6 examples as well. And I'm like, so do you want me to just change the examples from v4 to v6, or is there something I don't know? And they say, oh no, the v6 multi-homing is very different from v4. Okay, please explain. And it's not. All that's different in v6 are the numbers look different. And I would be starting with a 32. Otherwise, it's the same principles involved. So don't worry that all these examples are v4. One of these weeks, I'll change them all to v6. And we'll see. Anyway, so this type of what I'm going to show you is most common at the edge of the internet. So it's not really useful for a transit provider. They've got very different needs. But an edge operator, usually concerned about inbound traffic flows, because your outbound are just the requests that are going out. Whereas inbound are download, download, download. And people are by and large downloading, you know, looking at websites, reading news, media, YouTube, whatever. Right, so multi-homing to the same ISP. We're going to use a private AS number because we won't get a public AS number from the registry. I mean, you can try, but if your customer's only multi-homing to you, RIPE NCC will say, sorry, no can do. I mean, that's just the public policy. AS number is given to a network that's connected to 2 different networks, minimum 2 different networks. Right, so we're going to do 1 primary, 1 backup. So one link uses the primary, the other one is the backup. Is this useful? I don't know. I'm not entirely convinced this is an entirely useful configuration, but I'm going to show you because it shows an example. I mean, our sales guys at UUNet actually sold this service. We had a 2 meg main service with a 64K backup. And yeah, again, I'd gone off on holiday or something, I don't remember. And when I came back, it was like, okay, so how is a 64K link going to back up a 2 megabit? And the answer was, I don't know, I'm a sales guy. You make it work. But it shows the principle anyway. I mean, if an E1 went down and was running full, the 64K is useless. I mean, you couldn't even keep BGP running on it. It'll be totally, utterly congested. But anyway, it seemed like a nice service to offer. So here we go. Primary path here, A to C, backup path, B to D. Private AS 65534, public AS, I've just picked 100, with apologies to AS 100. AS100 is the upstream provider, removes the private AS and any sub-prefixes or whatever else is needed. So how do we do this? Well, if I want the AC link to be primary and the BD link to be backup, for incoming traffic, how to make this the primary? Well, if I announce my aggregate out here with a low MED, and if I announce my aggregate out here with a high MED, AS100 sees two paths to 65534. MED 0, MED 100, or whatever. Lowest MED wins, so that becomes the primary path for inbound traffic. What about outbound traffic? Well, AS100 sends me a default route, highest local preference wins. So what I do is, the default router here on router A set high local pref, on router B set low local pref, highest wins, so traffic will go out through the AC link. So that's really, really simple. But that's all we need to do. I mean, that was literally the configuration that we were using for our customers a way back, and it's what I've been using with folks over the years. Right, so we announced the 19 aggregate in each link, outbound are altered, inbound receive the default route, outbound we announce the 19 with increased metric, inbound we receive the default and reduce the local pref. Remember, lowest metric wins. This assumes here outbound prefix sent with metric 0. Here this is metric something else, a bigger number. And that's what we do. Configuration, very simple. This is the router A. Aggregate out, default in. Done. Easy. Router B, again, aggregate out, default in. We've got two route maps as well. Remember I said earlier, we're going to separate the filtering from the policy. So I'm going to use route maps for the policy. But again, depending on your favorite vendor, they will have a similar policy language. So router D out, what's this going to do? This one is going to increase the metric. Router D in, this is going to decrease the local pref. Sure enough, we go to the next slide. Router D out, set metric 10. So all prefixes that get sent out, which are only the aggregate, we set the metric to 10. Metric of 10, higher than metric of 0, this becomes the backup path. For the inbound default route, set local pref to 90. That is lower than the default local pref of 100. So this becomes the backup for outbound traffic. So that's very easy. Totally lifted from configurations that I've been doing over the years. All I've done is just change the addresses. This is commonly used in this type of situation. Router C, this is the upstream provider. Notice the only thing they've got here, default originate. This sends a default route to the customer on the BGP session. Inbound from customer, get the aggregate that the customer is sending. Outbound, we send just the default. Router D is exactly the same, don't blink. Right? Because all that's changed here is the IP address of the neighbor. So that was pretty simple. And then router E, which is talking to the rest of the world. Here's the remove private AS that I was talking about before. That's the remove private AS command. And that strips out the private AS so you don't leak it out to the internet. Okay, what's next? Links to the same ISP with load sharing. So, as I was saying, the previous example doesn't really have a great deal of practical use. You know, one link primary, the other one backup. You're not going to buy a circuit and leave it unused. When you leave it unused and you're suddenly going to need it, you'll discover, oh, it doesn't work. It may be up and you can ping it, but as soon as you put traffic on it, you discover that it's not actually going to work at all. Gosh, have I had that so many times. You know, and then our telecoms provider goes, oh, yeah, we did some maintenance and yeah, you lost some of the, I forgot what they're called now. You lost some of the time slots on the circuit. So, you know, the ping worked because it's no volume, no traffic, but trying to put kilobits or megabits per second on it, it stops. So what you tend to do is get two links to your upstream provider and use both of them at the same time. You tend to want to load balance rather than leaving one unused. So here we're going to try to do some load balancing. The links are equal capacity. Here we go, A to C is the first link, B to D is the second link. Again, we strip out private ASs that we're going to use for the customer. So what are we going to do here? Well, the standard rule, always announce an aggregate. So the aggregate goes out link 1, aggregate goes out link 2. So if one link fails, because we announced the aggregate, we get the backup. So that's the first. How do we load balance? Well, remember what I said several slides ago, like 15 minutes ago? Take the aggregate, divide into 2. I know the real world is not going to look like this, but let's start there and see what we get. So we take the 19, split it into 2 pieces. We send 120 out this way, we send the other 20 out that way. So AS100 sees the /19 aggregate coming in both links. It sees 1/20 coming on this link, another /20 coming on that link. So traffic for the first 20 goes this way, traffic for the second 20 goes that way. So in the perfect world, you'll have load balancing. Of course, customers have different download requirements, and your aggregate will probably have different usage. So it's not going to really work as a first cut, but that's where we start. And if we need to change the load balancing, just change the split. Maybe not a 20, maybe a 21. If you're really unlucky, you might have to go as far as a 22. So that's the sort of thing you try and do. You start with halving the address space, then make it into quarters, and just announce the quarters on either link until you get what you want. And if you can't even do that, then you probably have to start renumbering. If you've got broadband pools, or you still have dial-up, any address pools that you can easily renumber the end users on, try renumbering. It's pretty easy to renumber these dynamic pools. It's customers where you've given them static address space that's a bit more of a pain. Okay, so that's pretty much all we do. As for incoming, we accept the default route from the upstream and simply do nearest exit. Now that's usually good enough. Well, it's good enough at this stage. We'll look at the more complicated ones later. Configuration, here we go. Here's the aggregate we're generating. Outbound to router C, we're sending 1/20 and the aggregate. So half the address space and the aggregate. Inbound, we're accepting just the default route. Router B is the same configuration, just for the other /20. I'm not putting the slide up. But router C, inbound from the customer, we expect to hear the aggregate as well as the /20s. You find that some ISPs, because they've got customers load sharing like this, rather than putting a 20 in here, they might even make it a 21 to let the customer fine-tune more if they need to. I see some ISPs just go, 24. The downside there is the customer just sends out loads of 24s, no aggregate, and you end up with a mess. So this is reasonably common, 19, and they might allow it to be split into quarters. And then the E configuration, this is talking to the rest of the world. Again, we strip out the private AS and also strip out the customer sub-prefixes. So we only send the aggregate outbound. And I thought I'd put the default route in for outbound traffic. IBGP can't do nearest exit. Right? IBGP is just best path. So if you had an internal network and you're trying to do load balance your exit traffic, you can't do it with IBGP, because all the routers will just see one route as the best path. So what you do instead is you take the default route learned by BGP, drop it into your IGP. So here's an OSPF example. This will originate the default route with metric 2, as long as the default route exists in the RIB. So if BGP has put the default route into the routing table, OSPF goes, default route is here in the routing table, let me distribute it by OSPF as well. And that way we get the nearest exit in the network. And so you put this on both router A and router B, and then we get nearest exit for the network. Load chain configuration is only on the customer router. I mean, certainly when I was doing a lot of this, we found that a lot of people were really happy that they had the configuration. Meant they didn't have to phone the upstream ISP to get configuration or load balancing done, and they could fiddle around on their router. And our professional services people loved this as well, because if a customer broke the BGP, they could charge a customer to fix it. But it was quite good. All the configurations on the customer router, the upstream, all they have to do is accept the aggregate and sub-prefixes, strip out the private AS, block the sub-prefixes from going to the world, and it's done. Upstream providers don't want to do custom configurations. Right? They want it all to be standardized. And that's really the point I'm going to talk about here next after the coffee break. Upstreams don't want customized configuration. They want to standardize as much as possible. And that's where RFC 2270 comes in. It's how to standardize multiple customers who are dual-homed onto your backbone. So let's have a coffee break, half hour. It's 11 o'clock now, so let's come back 11:30 and we'll do the rest of the slide set. All right.